Hi, my name is Dave McGinty. This is the last episode of Wedding Marketing 101, which has been our extremely helpful 4-part series on how you can market your wedding business better. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, let somebody know. Thanks again for tuning in. We're going to be talking in this last episode about how to spend money on ads, including some information about targeting. We're going to do a case study at the end that's going to talk not only about that subject, but we're going to sort of cover a little bit about everything that we covered in the last 3 episodes, as well as this 4th and final one. How to spend money on ads, how to spend money generally on marketing. So there's going to be a lot of considerations here. This is the hard part. I speak to a lot of people that tell me that they don't balk at the idea of spending money on ads or spending money on marketing. It's just a question of, well, how do I spend money on marketing? So here's some considerations. First thing is budget. We referred to budget. Back in episode 1, we talked about your expectations from your spend. I want to just reiterate quickly what we talked about there, because it's key to this discussion as well. Depending on where you are in the business, especially if you're new-ish or you're not particularly established, you're not really booking out at the rate that you'd like, and the word-of-mouth referrals are not coming in at the rate that you would hope that they will later in your career, because it really takes 5-6 years for those to be ticking over to the point where you can rely on those for the vast majority of your business. So if you have to spend money generating those eyeballs to land on your product yourself, well then, what's a reasonable expectation in terms of the budget that you would need to spend? That comes down to how much you want to make in a given year. So if you decide that you want to turn over £70,000 worth of sales, £90,000 worth of sales, and that's regardless of expenses, we're talking about turnover for now. How much does it cost to turn that over? It's completely different for everyone. Some people in the wedding business work in high margin areas. Some people, I imagine the margins that a florist is able to make because they're buying so much stock for every wedding, I imagine that's a far lower margin business model than it is for example, a wedding videographer who has to pay for things like travel and some consumables, but the expenses overall, maybe second shooter costs, the expenses overall are going to be less. There are far less consumable costs there than there are for a florist who has a lot of kind of cost of sales. So I imagine for a florist, you need to make a much larger return on that money than maybe a videographer can. So although there's a shifting ratio there, and although you might need to make a 10-fold return if you're a florist, whereas a 5-fold return makes perfect sense if you're a videographer, there has to be a realistic expectation there. So I guess that's a question of, well, how much do I want to make? I want to make 70 grand of a year in sales. Should I expect to spend any less than 7 grand on marketing, which would represent a 10-fold return? Probably I wouldn't, especially if I'm not an established person who's getting a lot of word-of-mouth business. So I know we've covered that point already. I think it's worth reiterating, because I just think that there's no hard and fast rule there, but you do have to look at it and go, is this a realistic expectation? Here's my target, here's my budget. Does that make any sense? So as far as where that money then gets spent, I think again that depends on what phase of your business you're at. Most of this video is going to be about how you spend money on ads in particular, so that really is the last part of the process. That's about lead generation, that's about getting eyeballs on your service and your product. But if you're not at that place in your business where your brand is completely fundamentally solid, your website is a machine that just converts, if you're not at that place where everything is firing on all cylinders, do you then want to spend that money on ads directly right away to get eyeballs on it? You probably want to do some of that regardless of what situation you're in, because you just need to keep cash flow up. But be aware that when you're spending money to get eyeballs on your product, but your presentation isn't exactly where it should be, then that money is being spent inefficiently to some extent, because you would expect a lower conversion rate than you would get spending that same 500 quid, for example, on ads, but sending them to a much more finely tuned sort of conversion experience. So there's that efficiency thing to think about. So it depends on what stage you're at in your business as far as what you want to allocate your budget to. If you're very new and you're not presenting yourself the way you should be, then maybe your marketing budget goes on getting your collateral invested in a one-off investment, certainly for a few years, to make sure that the brand is there, the website's there, the sales collateral, the brochures, whatever, are all really solid, so that any eyeballs that do land there, organically or otherwise, word of mouth, are landing on something that's really tightly refined, and that's going to convert more efficiently, even if you're not able to spend 500 quid on ads because you spent it on something else over here. If you're much more established and you're really happy with that side of your business and you feel like everything is being presented really nicely, and all you need to do is increase the number of eyeballs landing on your website, for example, then spending money, significant money on ads is a great way of doing that, and we're going to get into how you do that. Maybe if you're more established than that and you're getting a lot of word of mouth stuff and you're just very, very popular organically on social media because of the fact that you've been around for so long and people really dig your stuff, then maybe you still, when you're at the top of the tree, you still want to be looking at what's the next thing you can do, and maybe that's where you want to spend money on something like SEO. So I'm really talking to that sort of middle of the pack. Things are going quite well, or I've got a little bit of refinement to do over here. I'm not booking out at exactly the rate I'd like to, or my pricing needs to go up, or whatever it is. So I need to invest more in ads. So we're going to be talking about ads today and how we get eyeballs on the product based on using ad platforms. So we're obviously going to get into what platforms, what type of ads, but firstly, let's talk about schedule. So what do we want to do with that budget? We want to determine some kind of marketing budget based on how much we want to make in the year and what our expectations are. So we want to come up with a figure that's reasonable there, and then we want to figure out, well, when do we use that? Because it's not really a strategy as such to just boost everything year round on Facebook, £4 here, £5 there. That adds up to a huge amount of money, or it can add up to a lot of money that you would think, well, if I had that money, if you spent £3 boosting Facebook ads 3 or 4 times a week, that can end up 500, 600, 700 quid at the end of the year. But if you knew you were going to spend 700 quid on Facebook ads all year, would you do it that way? Would you drip feed it all the way through the calendar really evenly, or would you go, well, I'm going to plan a couple of campaigns at this time of year and that time of year? How you want to schedule that is up to you. You should look at Google Trends. Google Trends is a good way of figuring out when people are searching for such and such. And as we covered in one of the previous episodes, in the wedding world, people are searching a lot in January, and they're searching a lot at the end of summer as well, August, September. Does that necessarily mean that quality inquiries are coming in January and September? No, not necessarily. And it might be that for your business, you find that you're much more productive after that rush has gone and after people are being a little bit more sober and considered. That's definitely a possibility. It may be that all the people searching in January are people that got engaged at Christmas, and maybe the vast majority of them are looking to tick that box as quickly as possible. Maybe you're not looking for the box ticking type. Makes perfect sense. Whatever time of year you reckon you want to be targeting to acquire more business, maybe that's where you want to front load that marketing budget, or the majority of it. So the idea is, have a sense of what you're going to be spending this year on marketing, and have a sense of, well, when do I spend that money for best results? And that is, I think, the perfect way of starting to restructure your marketing spend, so that you're not just chucking money away on every post and not really considering it more deeply. And then if you know that you're going to be spending big in February, and you're going to be spending big in October, or you're going to be spending big in July, well, then that gives you a target to then start to work on a batch of content or a particular campaign or something like that, where now your marketing plan for the year is, in terms of scheduling, is dictating when you produce certain pieces of content. This piece of content that you're watching just now is not coincidentally being released in January, because January is a great time for wedding businesses to be taking stock. They're a bit quieter than they are in July, obviously, but it's also peak booking season, and it's a great opportunity to be refining your marketing and getting yourself up to scratch for that sort of peak booking season that's coming at the end of January, February, and into March. So when do you want to release this content? You want to release it in correspondence with when your big marketing spends are and when you think people are going to be looking for it. So that's a way of kind of scheduling out not only the spend, but also the content that you produce. So I want to talk about some of the platforms that we can use effectively to market ourselves. I've said in a previous video that I think Facebook ads is one of the most powerful advertising platforms, or maybe the most powerful advertising platform that has ever existed. And I specifically say that because of the incredible power of targeting that you can do in there, and we're going to move on to targeting shortly. Generally speaking, if you're planning on spending money on Facebook, then things to consider, along with everything that we talked about in episode 3, because I think that episode 3, as far as the creation of your ads and the actual creative content of them, episode 3 is a really, really useful touch point on that. So the episode that we did on content marketing and social strategy. But how we actually use that platform, again, Facebook ads, that's a passive platform for the user. They're not on Facebook shopping, so you're looking to create content that is of interest to them, and you're looking then to just target effectively and get in front of them, as opposed to AdWords, like we said before, and other sort of keyword search-based advertising platforms. So again, like we talked about before, I think that Facebook ads is the place that you emphasize the benefits of your business or your product, and you're talking really about the emotional impact of that rather than talking about features. If we go into AdWords, and AdWords is a great solution for certain businesses, especially if you think that search is going to be a key part of your strategy. AdWords is a great place to be. People are maybe in a more active buying mode, and we're going to get into a little bit more of that shortly. So therefore, you're going to want to emphasize certain features, just certain sales features that you think you have in mind, and think strategically about the kind of things that people are going to be searching for and what you can learn from people when they're searching for certain things. AdWords, the thing with AdWords is that you're almost going to want to have a bunch of corresponding landing pages on your website for almost every major keyword search phrase that you're going to be attacking. If you're a photographer and you know that you're going to be appearing in certain keyword search phrases because you're targeting them and spending money on them in AdWords, then you should write a bespoke page on your website, maybe a hidden page, that people who click through from that particular keyword search advert are going to land on. So if you target documentary wedding photographer Glasgow, for example, and that means that when people type in documentary wedding photographer Glasgow, they're served an ad by your business. Well, you can, even if it's the same generic ad that's served for a bunch of other keywords, you can specify the landing page that that user will be sent to if they click on an ad that they saw for that keyword search. So you've got documentary wedding photographer Glasgow, you're going to want to send them to a landing page that is very, very specifically designed around that language, that's very specifically curates some of your best documentary work. Even if you're targeting a bunch of these different keyword search phrases, it's just a better idea you can do that level of specificity when the user is clicking through. You can send them anywhere you want, depending on what keywords they click through from. So take full advantage of that and use that, because AdWords is an expensive platform, so it's expensive until you start to really refine that. The other thing you're going to want to do there regularly is monitor, where am I getting the best, not only the best click-through rate, because you can get the best click-through rate, but it doesn't turn into anything because you've got your goals slightly misaligned there with what the user needs. But what are you getting the lowest cost per click on, and what is actually generating inquiries for you at the other end. AdWords is a huge topic, and there's a bunch of, we're not a pay-per-click agency. There are really, really good resources for learning much more about AdWords than we're going to be covering in this video. And it's something that people overlook because it is expensive, and in this business, if something's expensive, more often than not, we don't want to dip in a toe. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than taking out a full page ad in one of the bumper sort of traditional wedding magazines. And it's worth a try for certain businesses that are going to be looking at search as a key component of how they attract business. I think Pinterest has incredible potential as an advertising platform. I've only been involved in one campaign that actually utilised it. There's a couple of really smart things that you can do on Pinterest. You can obviously place sponsor pins onto people's timelines when they're searching for specific things. You can use not only sponsor pins, I would actually brand them up so that you put a little bit of branding on your sponsor pins so that people actually associate it with you as well. Potentially, you could consider doing that. The great thing about Pinterest is that you can target by interest category, but you can also then start to target by specific keywords as well, which gets you into a sort of, it's the same territory as AdWords. And the thing to consider there, they have a keyword planner in the ad app for Pinterest, but actually you want to go onto Pinterest itself and do your own keyword research by typing into the search bar in Pinterest itself and figuring out some of the really specific things that people are searching. Now, when it comes to any keyword-based advertising platform, the interesting thing about keywords, and you can do a huge amount of additional research again on this, all of these topics really you're going to want to get into more. This is really a bit of an overview. With keywords, we can interpret what stage a customer is at in their purchasing journey. If someone is searching wedding venue Scotland and you want to appear on that first page of Google for that, or if they're searching wedding venue Scotland in Pinterest, that tells me that they're at the start of their venue selection journey. That's a very generic search term. Someone searches barn venue Perthshire, they've made a bunch of decisions at this point. They've made a decision on the locality, they've made a decision on the style of venue and style of wedding. So there's someone who's much further down the chain in terms of their actual purchasing journey. So that's going to make me decide to serve them different content, or potentially it's going to make me decide, well, I don't want to be in the rat race for everyone looking for a wedding venue Scotland, but if you're looking for a barn venue in Perthshire, I own a barn venue in Perthshire, I want to be on everyone's first page of Google for that, so that's when I'm going to invest my resources. It could be that, or you could want to appear in both, but then you're going to want to serve up very different content to that generic search versus this much more specific search where you know that they're looking for a very specific thing now, and you know that they're further down the line in their buying journey. So that's just, again, that's another consideration for the kind of thing you're going to want to put in front of them, depending on where they are in their buying journey, and that depends also on the keyword search phrase that they use on Google AdWords as well. So I'm now going to talk about the targeting facilities that they have within some of these ads platforms. So obviously the keyword based stuff, we've kind of covered that in different episodes, touched on it today. So we're therefore talking about predominantly Facebook, Instagram, places where we're targeting based on a combination of demographic and interest factors. I think a helpful thing to do here is to literally have customer profiles that you make up, which is just a little biography of a fictional person, genuinely, of a fictional customer that you think is your ideal customer. So first of all, knowing your ideal customer, well, that's a huge amount of research and introspection and gut feeling and whatever secret sauce goes into figuring out who is my ideal customer. Hopefully we've kind of half touched on stuff that will help you figure that stuff out, but really one thing I think is really helpful for figuring out your ideal customer is who are the customers I've had a great experience with in the past. And when you're doing your customer profile, which again is just a biography of things about this person, not necessarily things related to the service that they booked or the kind of wedding they had even, but things about them as a human being, you can literally think, well, I did that, I got on so well with that particular bride, and she's the type of person I'd love to book more brides just like her. Well, literally use her name and call that one of your customer profiles. As if it's Sarah was awesome, I really want to book more Sarahs. Well, Sarah is the name of one of your customer profiles, and write down everything about Sarah. What's she like? What do you think she reads? What do you think she listens to? What do you think she does for fun? Figure out that stuff, because you're just fleshing out a prospective customer profile that you can then use to be like, okay, so what interest categories might I want to target on things like the Facebook ads platform? Look at, well, those, so there was Sarah was great, but also Emily was awesome and David was amazing. So what does Sarah and Emily and David have in common? What are the sort of things that they probably all share? Well, that's a great indicator of either an interest category or a demographic piece of information or a location-based piece of information. Whatever those people have in common, those ideal customers that were so amazing, what do they have in common? Maybe there are parts of the service, parts of the style of wedding that they did or something like that that you think they have in common, in which case that's another thing to pick up on. But if they just have things about them personally that they have in common, stick it on your customer profile and use it as an interest category just to experiment with. Again, for a lot of people, finding the ideal customer is actually a personality thing. It's actually just, I like really chilled out creative people that are not going to fuss about the small stuff, and they're going to have a really laid back, interesting wedding full of their own personality. Well, that's a personality thing, and that comes down to whether you're going to connect with them personally. So I would guess some of yourself goes into that customer profile as well. Again, I just think that's a huge amount of experimentation. All of this is an experiment, but just trying to figure out what those interest categories are, that's a particularly big experiment. We're going to look at a case study later on. We're going to touch on that a little bit more. But in a nutshell, interest categories, what type of newspaper do you think this person reads, honestly? Because if you don't want to work for people that read the Telegraph, for example, or the Sun, for example, well then you can exclude based on those interest categories. If you don't want to work for people that follow a particular political party, you can exclude based on those interest categories if that's the mindset that you have. There's a bunch of things you can do. If you want to target nothing but vegans, you obviously you can't actually identify as a vegan on Facebook like you can identify your relationship status or your gender. But as the joke goes, Facebook's going to know you're a vegan just like everyone else does. So that's the kind of thing that if you decide, well, I'm only working with vegans, or I'm only doing this or that or this or that, you can find them dead easily through the Facebook ads platform. The other thing you want to think about with the Facebook ads platform is, where do I arrive in their buying journey? So if I'm a venue, I'm the first thing they're going to book, because until they have a date, they can't book anything, and until they have a venue, they can't have a date. So I have the option on Facebook to target brides and grooms that are newly engaged. Within 3 months, I can target newly engaged. Within 6 months, I can target newly engaged within a year. So I want to figure out, well, do I only want to focus my attention on brides and grooms that are newly engaged within 3 months? Possibly. That's an economic consideration as well as anything else, because although there'll be plenty of brides that have been engaged for 6 months, plenty of grooms that have been engaged for 12 months that don't yet have a venue, I don't need every bride and groom in the country to know about my venue. I need 150 a year, whatever it is that I'm targeted to bring in, maybe less. I only need that amount, and so maybe I can find all of that amount by making this really safe bet that these people that have been engaged for 3 months are the least likely of those categories to have never booked a venue. If I'm a videographer, and I was for 8 years shooting weddings, I know that for some people I am a luxury add-on at the end if there's money. Although you want to transform that perception of your business and you don't want to be thought of in those terms necessarily, because that might limit people's ability to spend on it and things like that. If the reality is that that's the category that you can fall into, then you're not necessarily just limited to those people that are newly engaged. You're maybe more available to people throughout different parts of the buying process, so maybe it's a very different experience for you. Photographers seem to be snapped up much earlier in the process, so again, maybe that's one of those things you want to target, people that are newly engaged. Last thing in terms of potential interest categories, think about other sources of wedding inspiration that you really admire and check if they are an interest category. So some of the bigger blogs, things like that, will be interest categories. And maybe there's a particular blog that you think, well, my customers would read this blog, we'd love to end up on this blog with this type of wedding, so maybe I'm going to target people that follow this blog and within a certain geographical area. And that's the other thing about geographical area, is that it can tell you things about the biographical status of the people that live there potentially. Maybe people that live in a certain area are all professionals or students, or we can learn lots of different things demographically about an area. And there's actually government tools that can sort of help you to extrapolate some interesting data if you really want to get hardcore about different geographical areas and the sort of implications that they have for your target. So then it comes down to, well, what's your messaging when you're putting this stuff into the world? And again, I think your messaging, you're going to want to really hammer those differential factors. You're going to really want to focus on why you, why does it have to be you? Like we talked about all the way back in episode 1. That's just a key way of, you're spending all this money, so you need to separate yourself. You need to cut through that noise, because there's now actual cash money riding on it as well. You want to reinforce your target audience in the copy sometimes. So even though you're going to the trouble of targeting potentially in some cases quite specifically, and it's good to target specifically because again, you're not looking for everyone that's getting married to see your stuff. You're looking at this narrow band that are much more likely to connect with you personally. So not only are you targeting them using the targeting, but you can also reinforce that targeting in the language by appealing to the type of person that you think might be interested using the language in the copy. You're going to want to include strong calls to action. You're going to want to give them somewhere to go right away. Make sure you include a link to a page that is optimized for gathering exactly the type of inquiries that you're hoping to get from this campaign. You're going to want to again emphasize your value and do so early in the copy. Emphasize what they're getting from this piece of content that you're putting out in the world. Make sure we covered that in the previous episode, but worth repeating, since everything we covered in the previous episode we're now just banking cash on, because I think spending money on ads, I actually think in many cases is about putting out the content that you would be putting out organically, but just putting money behind it. There's also obviously there's a case for making sales focused ads. I think the way that Facebook and Instagram are headed, again, like I said in the previous video, you're not necessarily going to be wanting to put out these sales focused ads that are all completely focused on you and your product and service, because I think they're just going to get more expensive and less effective and more expensive and less effective. So actually I think you're taking content and you're taking these gifts that you're making for your audience and you're just putting money behind those to get them out to a wider audience, and that's going to be how we connect with people. And I guess the last thing is include a primer, so a little bit about who you are. That potentially directly contradicts what I just said, but the beauty of that is people don't understand why your post is on their timeline. It could be that your friend liked the post when they were swiping through. It could be that you have sponsored it. There's a million different reasons why you can end up in someone's timeline and they don't know if they're looking at someone from Australia that they can never hire, or whether they're looking at someone who works in their geographical area. So put a little primer so that people understand who you are and what you do. We should talk about retargeting briefly. This is another topic that you're going to want to do some hardcore research on if you're actually interested in pursuing this type of approach. But retargeting is an option that's available on Facebook, AdWords, Pinterest. There's a bunch of different ad platforms that are going to allow you to retarget, and what that effectively means is you install a little piece of code on your website that tracks when a user from Facebook or Pinterest or AdWords, someone with a Google account, whatever, has landed on your website. So your website will know when a Facebook user has been on it, even if they didn't click through from an ad. And what you're then able to do on Facebook is you're able to produce ads that are directed purely at those people who have already been on your site. So if you think of how that would develop your content for a start, the type of content you're going to want to show them, you can learn a lot about the fact that someone's already been on your site, and then you can use the pixel to be much more specific about where they've been specifically on your site, whether they put something in their basket but they didn't check out. There's a bunch of different ways that you can code your way around understanding exactly where their user experience on your site ended, so I can serve them up something that is designed for someone that's at that stage in the purchasing journey. They already know who I am. They're obviously shopping properly. They're not just browsing around for inspiration on blogs. They're looking at specific suppliers. So then the other thing that's really exciting about that, especially on Facebook, is that you then have the potential of making a lookalike audience. So you can take, well, who are the people that have been on your website? And then like Facebook will apply this proprietary system to figuring out what they have in common with a bunch of other people that haven't yet been on your site, but that might similarly be interested in your product. That's a really cool way of using really magic stuff that they have. It's the stuff that turns up in like Black Mirror, the really creepy stuff. They do that on your behalf, figure out, well, who's just like these people that have been on their site, and let's build a much bigger audience of people that are potentially going to be just as likely to end up on their site if we show them the right kind of ad. There are some limitations to that. From what I can tell, for the time being, you can only target on a UK-wide basis, so that's potentially not going to be useful for many smaller wedding suppliers that are working in a much more local market. But what you will find in the future is that they will refine that, and they'll be able to, I'm sure, improve that service so that you can target a much smaller geographical area, and then those lookalike audiences are going to get really interesting, and they might be very interesting for some larger businesses in the wedding market already. So lookalike audiences on top of the retargeting pixel on Facebook and also on other platforms. These are services that are kind of incredible now on a borderline creepy way, and then they're going to just get better and better, and it's the kind of thing, if you're interested in that, again, I would research that much more thoroughly in the near future. The last thing, of course, to bear in mind is, I've alluded to a couple of times, the fact that this is sort of creepy stuff. It's getting a lot of attention on podcasts and other 2018 stuff. I would be therefore very sensitive with how you use it, and just make sure that you're not the wrong side of creepy when you use these retargeting facilities, because it has the potential to be very off-putting for people as well. So you probably want to just chill a little bit when you use that stuff, and make sure you're using it in a kind of sensitive and smart fashion. So I'm going to talk now about a specific case study. It's a project that we've been working on now for the last couple of years. It's called the Braw Brides Wedding Workshop. So the Braw Brides Wedding Workshop is an event that we've helped Braw Brides Wedding Blog, which is a Scottish wedding blog, focuses on sort of artistic DIY alternative weddings. We've helped him put on an event twice a year for the last few years, and it's been a wedding planning event that's it's functioned similarly to a wedding fair, but really it's actually a way of getting some smart, knowledgeable suppliers in the same room as a bunch of people planning their wedding, and having them have these non-sales focused, relaxed conversations about wedding planning, basically. It's been a great way of getting customers and suppliers into non-sales focused conversations, which allows them to connect, which is basically the content marketing strategy that we talked about in the last episode, except live in a room with a bunch of people. I want to talk to you about how we marketed that and how we helped Braw Brides to market that. And we're just going to go through a bunch of stuff that hopefully will sort of illuminate some of the stuff we talked about today, and I'll also touch on stuff from the last 3 episodes as well. So the first thing to note, obviously, when we went to market this event was the differential qualities that this has. So it's going to be, first of all, full of independent creative suppliers. There's a particular visual aesthetic standard that applies across those suppliers. So in other words, it's not a first come first served join up for this fair type event. It's a curated list of suppliers who've been invited. It's going to be, again, relaxed, interactive. So we are looking at marketing a bunch of little interactive exhibits, appointment based. At 2:00 there's going to be a talk here, at 2:30 there's going to be a demo here, that kind of thing. So it's marketed basically as a wedding planning event, and it's designed to be a wedding planning event. And so those are the differential factors that we want to hammer whenever we produce collateral for it. So as such, the collateral that we put into the world has to be design led, and it has to feel like it matches that sort of DIY, really creative style. So we went for a sort of, on the most recent wedding workshop, we went for this kind of scratchy illustration motif, emphasising the sort of handmade quality of a lot of the suppliers there. So it has a sort of typewritten feel, which maybe feels kind of tangible, home printed. There's no swirly type in sight, there's no really traditional wedding imagery there at all. In terms of image selection from the photographers, so what we did was we got images from every supplier of their work, and we're choosing, you know, colourful stuff. It's not wedding traditional, professional photos only. But by doing these things and by producing individual images for each supplier, the idea there is that we're incentivising suppliers to become ambassadors for the brand. So we're basically saying, here, you're exhibiting at this fair, so send us some images of some of your most creative work, and we'll make you up a bespoke piece of promotional material that you can put on your Insta feed, your Facebook feed, and it promotes, yes, this event, but it does so using your work front and centre. In terms of the messaging, when we posted about this on social, we're looking at no use of the word fair. There's no mention of any wedding fair. We are constantly emphasising that this is for, you know, if you're planning a creative and personality-driven wedding, that kind of thing, and we're looking to constantly emphasise that you're going to be dealing with independent small business suppliers. There's the constant reinforcement that this is for creative and alternative newlyweds to be. There's calls to action to tag your friends. This is back in the day where calls to action to tag your friends was an easy thing to do. Nowadays you need to be a little bit more artful on that, which we talked about in the previous episode. Calls to action, it's click this link, it's a free, book your free space on this workshop, emphasising the value there as well. So a little tightly designed little post that just goes out into the world. A lot of money gets put behind that, make sure it's been shown to a lot of people. So it's designed really to capture the value of the event, and just to be really, really highly targeted, and to be, not only are we targeting it in the targeting, but we're also targeting it in the copy. Do you have a friend? Does this sound like your friend? You know, that kind of thing. Because people respond well to that. Oh, I'll do my friend a favour. That sounds like Sarah that's planning this epic, you know, bohemian wedding. Like, that's just Sarah all over. I'm going to tag Sarah. What we're looking to do with the targeting is we are looking to shrink that audience. So we'd rather have 400 people in the building that are well on their way to engaging positively with these suppliers than have 2,000 people that are, you know, just as likely to go along to the big wedding show at the SCCC, that aren't as likely to be primed to want to deal with these small independent suppliers or to deal with this particular type of aesthetic. So probably in terms of the targeting for that event, we were looking to find people that were likely to respond well to the independent nature of the suppliers at the show. We were looking to find people that weren't going to be driven primarily on price, because there's a lot of premium suppliers at this show. We were targeting people that were newly engaged within the sort of Glasgow area, therefore likely to travel to the event, which is in Glasgow. And we were looking for, in some cases, we were targeting people who were following existing sources of wedding inspiration that we thought were a really good fit for the event as well. So anyway, that's just some of the ways that we helped Brobrise to promote the wedding workshop. That pretty much wraps up Wedding Marketing 101, which is my way of saying that's everything you need to know about wedding marketing. Obviously not the case, so there's a huge amount of research that you need to do in every aspect of this. Hopefully this has been a decent overview of some things to think about and some places to put your sort of energy and resources. Once again, I want to say thanks very much to everyone for tuning in for these videos. I know some of them have been quite dry. That's kind of the nature of the beast in it. I really appreciate your participation. If you're watching this but you haven't seen the other three, well, terrible place to start for a start, but go and check them out. Hopefully there's more useful stuff in each of those. Again, thanks for your participation. Thanks for all the really, really nice feedback that we've had. Thanks for everyone who's got in touch to talk to us about what we can do to help them. If you do have any questions, we'll do the live Q&A as usual in the Facebook group. If you're watching this, obviously, weeks after the fact, ship has sailed on that, but send us an email, send us a tweet, or leave a comment. Leave a comment in general if you enjoyed it. If there's anyone you think would enjoy the series, then we'd really appreciate it if you direct their attention to it as well. Thanks very much.